A woman sat quietly in her seat, just another tired passenger on a busy flight to Denver. No one knew she once flew fighter jets for the Navy. Then, high above the clouds, the captain suddenly collapsed with a heart attack, and nearly 300 lives were now in danger. Only she could help. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Rachel Turner sat in seat 22C, looking out at the runway lights of Chicago O'Hare Airport. She wore a simple blue jacket and jeans. Nobody around her knew that 10 years ago, she had flown F-16 jets for the United States Navy. Today, she was just another tired traveler going to Denver for her cousin's wedding. Rachel had left the Navy 3 years earlier. She now worked as a flight safety trainer for a small aviation company. She still loved airplanes, but she missed the sky in a different way. Sitting in a passenger seat felt strange to her, almost too quiet. The airplane was a large Boeing 767, carrying 301 passengers and 9 crew members. It was a full flight, and most seats were taken. Families were going on vacation. Business travelers were checking their phones one last time before takeoff. A young couple in the row behind Rachel talked quietly about their honeymoon plans. Next to Rachel sat an older man named George Kelly. He held his boarding pass with shaking hands. This was only his second time flying. He was going to see his son, who had just become a father for the first time. Nervous? Rachel asked him gently. A little, George admitted. I don't like takeoff. My stomach always feels strange. It's normal, Rachel said with a calm smile. Flying is actually one of the safest ways to travel. You will be fine. George looked at her and felt a little better. He did not know that the woman beside him had once flown fighter jets faster than the speed of sound. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Rachel watched with quiet interest, the way she always did. Old habits from the Navy stayed with her. She noticed small details other passengers never saw, like how the crew checked each exit door twice before takeoff. The captain of the flight was James Coleman, a man with almost 20 years of experience flying commercial planes. He was known for his steady hands and his friendly voice on the intercom. His co-pilot, First Officer Diana Lopez, had been flying with the airline for 6 years. In the cockpit, Captain Coleman finished his final checks before takeoff. Everything looks good, he told Lopez. Weather is clear all the way to Denver. Good, Lopez replied. Should be an easy flight. The plane pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway. A few minutes later, it lifted off smoothly into the evening sky. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane climbed higher, and passengers began to relax into their seats. Rachel pulled out a small notebook from her bag. She was preparing notes for a safety training session she would give the following week. Even though she was no longer in uniform, she still thought like a pilot every single day. About 25 minutes into the flight, everything seemed calm. The plane had reached its cruising height of 36,000 feet. Passengers were watching movies, reading books, or sleeping. The flight attendants began preparing the drink cart for service. Then, in the cockpit, something went wrong. Captain Coleman suddenly felt a heavy pain in his chest. At first, he thought it might be nothing, maybe just stress or hunger. But the pain grew stronger within seconds. He gripped the armrest of his seat, and sweat formed on his forehead. James? Are you okay? Lopez asked, noticing his pale face. Coleman could not answer clearly. He tried to speak, but only a weak sound came out. His hand pressed hard against his chest, and his breathing became fast and shallow. Lopez understood immediately that this was serious. She grabbed the cabin intercom. This is the cockpit. I need the lead flight attendant here right now. It's an emergency. Within seconds, flight attendant Karen Ruiz rushed to the cockpit door. Lopez explained quickly what was happening. The captain is having chest pain. It might be a heart attack. I need a doctor, and I need help moving him, Lopez said. Karen's face turned pale, but she stayed calm. She hurried back into the cabin and made an announcement over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical situation on board. If there is a doctor or nurse among our passengers, please press your call button immediately. The cabin filled with worried whispers. George gripped his armrest tightly and looked at Rachel with fear in his eyes. "What's happening?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet," Rachel said, though her training was already telling her this was more serious than a normal problem. She could feel a slight change in how the plane was moving, a small shift that most passengers would never notice. She knew someone in the cockpit had taken over the controls in a hurry. A passenger named Dr. Robert Hayes, a heart doctor from Chicago, pressed his call button and made his way to the front of the plane. Karen led him quickly toward the cockpit. Other passengers began to notice the tension in the cabin. A young mother named Susan Wells held her baby closer and whispered softly to calm him. Two college students sitting near the wing looked at each other with worried eyes, unsure what to say. A businessman across the aisle put down his laptop and sat very still, watching the crew move quickly through the cabin. Everyone could feel that something serious was happening, even if they did not know the full details yet. Karen tried her best to keep the cabin calm. She walked slowly through the aisle, speaking softly to nervous passengers and answering simple questions when she could. Her training had prepared her for many situations, but nothing felt as heavy as watching her captain in pain while trying to keep 300 people calm at the same time. Meanwhile, Lopez was now flying the plane alone. She had disconnected the autopilot to keep full control, and she was speaking with air traffic control to explain the emergency. Chicago Center, this is Flight 219. We have a medical emergency involving the captain. Requesting the nearest airport for an emergency landing. The controller responded quickly. Flight 219, understood. Kansas City International is 60 miles ahead. You are cleared to divert immediately. Inside the cockpit, Dr. Hayes checked Captain Coleman's pulse and breathing. The captain was conscious, but in serious pain. His skin was cold and pale. He needs a hospital right away, Dr. Hayes told Lopez. This looks like a serious heart attack. With Karen's help, they carefully moved Captain Coleman out of his seat and laid him down in the front area of the cabin, where Dr. Hayes could continue helping him. Lopez was now completely alone in the cockpit, flying a large passenger plane by herself while trying to manage the emergency landing. She was trained for this, but flying alone while worrying about her captain's life was extremely difficult. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. Back in the cabin, Rachel could sense the tension building. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "Where are you going?" George asked nervously. "I might be able to help," Rachel said simply. She walked toward the front of the plane, where Karen was trying to keep order among worried passengers. Rachel spoke to her calmly. "I'm a former Navy pilot. 10 years flying fighter jets. If your first officer needs help up there, I might be useful." Karen looked surprised, but she did not waste time. "Wait here," she said, and went to speak with Lopez. A moment later, Karen returned. "She wants to talk to you." Rachel stepped into the cockpit. Lopez glanced at her quickly, her hands full with the controls. "Karen says you're a Navy pilot." 10 years, F-16s. "I know general aircraft systems well. I've also studied commercial cockpit procedures for my job. Tell me what you need." Lopez felt a wave of relief. "I need someone to help with checklists and radio calls while I focus on flying. Can you do that?" "Yes," Rachel said, sitting down in the empty seat beside her. The two women, strangers just minutes before, began working together smoothly. Rachel read through the emergency descent checklist while Lopez confirmed each step. Their teamwork felt natural, like they had trained together for years. "Kansas City weather?" Rachel asked. "Clear skies, light wind. Should be a simple approach, Lopez answered. As they descended toward the airport, Rachel handled the radio while Lopez focused on flying the aircraft carefully. Their voices stayed calm and steady, even though both of them understood how serious the situation was. Flight 219, Kansas City approach. Turn left, heading 180. Descend to 5,000 feet, the controller said. Turning left, heading 180, descending to 5,000. Flight 219, Rachel answered clearly. In the cabin, Karen made another announcement to keep passengers informed. We are making an emergency landing in Kansas City. Please remain calm and keep your seatbelts fastened. We expect to land in about 15 minutes. Many passengers were frightened, but the calm voice of the crew helped keep the cabin from turning into panic. George held his seatbelt tightly and looked toward the front of the plane, wondering what was happening. As they got closer to the airport, Lopez configured the plane for landing. Gear down, she called out. Gear down and locked, Rachel confirmed, reading from the checklist. Flaps 20. Flaps 20, checklist complete. The runway came into view through the front windows. Fire trucks and ambulances were already waiting along the sides, ready for the emergency. Lopez guided the large plane down smoothly, and the wheels touched the ground with barely a bump. Applause broke out in the cabin as passengers realized they had landed safely. George let out a long breath and wiped his forehead. We made it, he whispered to himself. As soon as the plane stopped at the gate, paramedics rushed aboard and carefully moved Captain Coleman onto a stretcher. Dr. Hayes walked beside them, giving details about his condition to the medical team. Within minutes, Coleman was taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. Lopez turned to Rachel with a tired but grateful smile. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without your help. You were already doing everything right, Rachel replied. I just helped carry some of the weight. But the emergency was not fully over. The airline needed a plan to get all the passengers safely to Denver. A replacement captain from another city would take almost 5 hours to arrive, and many passengers had important reasons to reach Denver quickly, including a family with a wedding to attend and several people with connecting flights. Lopez spoke with the airline's operations team and the aviation authorities. Because of the unusual situation and Rachel's proven skill during the emergency, officials discussed the possibility of allowing Rachel to help complete the flight under special temporary approval, with Lopez continuing as the lead pilot in command. Lopez turned to Rachel. They are willing to give you temporary approval to sit as a support pilot for the rest of the flight to Denver, if you agree. I will remain in command, but having you beside me would make the flight much safer and faster for everyone. Rachel thought about it carefully. This was an unusual request, and she had never done anything exactly like it before. But she also thought about the passengers, the tired families, and George, who wanted to reach his newborn grandchild as soon as possible. I'll do it, she said. But I want the passengers to know the full truth about what happened and who I am. No hiding anything. Lopez agreed completely. A short time later, Karen walked through the cabin to explain the situation honestly to every passenger. She told them about Captain Coleman's heart attack, his stable condition at the hospital, and the choice they now had. They could wait several hours for a new captain, or continue the journey with Lopez as captain and Rachel, a highly experienced former Navy pilot, assisting in the cockpit under official temporary approval. Passengers asked many questions, and Rachel walked to the front of the cabin to answer some of them herself. I flew fighter jets for 10 years in the Navy, she said. I have studied commercial aircraft procedures for years through my safety work. First Officer Lopez will remain in full command of this flight. I am simply here to help her fly safely and efficiently to Denver. George raised his hand. If you can fly a fighter jet, I think you can help fly this plane just fine, he said with a small laugh, breaking some of the tension in the cabin. After a short discussion, almost every passenger chose to continue the flight. A few decided to wait for another flight instead, and the airline helped arrange that for them. Soon, the plane was ready again. Rachel sat beside Lopez, both focused and steady. The takeoff from Kansas City was smooth, and the rest of the flight passed calmly. Passengers who had been strangers hours earlier were now talking to each other about the incredible day they were sharing. As they approached Denver, the sky was clear, and the landing was smooth and gentle. When the wheels touched the runway, quiet applause spread through the cabin once again, followed by relieved laughter. At the gate, passengers slowly gathered their bags, but many stopped to thank Rachel and Lopez personally. George shook Rachel's hand firmly. "Because of you, I'll get to hold my grandson today," he said, his eyes filled with emotion. "I won't forget this." News of the emergency had already reached the airport, and a few reporters were waiting near the gate. Rachel kept her answers simple and modest. "This was a team effort," she said to one reporter. "First Officer Lopez flew this plane safely the entire time. I only helped share the workload during a difficult moment. The real heroes are the crew, the doctor on board, and the air traffic controllers who guided us safely." Later that evening, Rachel received good news. Captain Coleman had been stabilized at the hospital, and doctors expected him to make a full recovery. Months later, the airline created a new safety program, inspired by what happened on Flight 219. It encouraged pilots, doctors, and other trained professionals to register their skills so crews could quickly know if help was available on board during emergencies. Rachel returned to her normal life as a safety trainer, but the story of Flight 219 stayed with her. It reminded her that being a hero rarely means seeking attention. Most of the time, it simply means noticing when someone needs help, and being brave enough to offer it. George's family invited Rachel to his grandson's first birthday party the following year. She went, not as a famous pilot, but as a friend who had once helped a stranger during the hardest hour of a difficult day. It was a simple reminder that ordinary kindness, paired with quiet skill, can change many lives at once. Diana Lopez also stayed in touch with Rachel after that day. A few months later, Diana was promoted to full captain, and she often told her new co-pilots about the flight to Denver. She said it taught her something she could never have learned from a training manual, that real courage is not about staying fearless, but about staying focused while afraid, and trusting the people around you to help carry the load. Karen Ruiz continued working as a flight attendant, but she began giving small talks to new crew members about handling emergencies with calm words and steady hands. She often said that passengers do not remember every safety rule a crew follows. They remember how they were treated when they were scared. Captain Coleman returned to flying about a year later, after months of recovery and therapy. On his first flight back, Rachel and Diana both sent him messages wishing him a safe journey. He later said that hearing about how his crew and passengers had handled the emergency gave him strength during his recovery, knowing that his team had kept everyone safe even without him. Susan Wells, the young mother who had held her baby close during the emergency, later wrote a short letter to the airline thanking the crew and Rachel for their calm handling of the situation. She said her son was too young to remember that day, but she would tell him the story when he was older, as an example of how strangers can look out for one another. Years later, whenever Rachel flew as a passenger, she still felt the same quiet habit from her Navy days. She noticed exits, listened to engine sounds, and watched the crew with a trained eye. But she also carried something new from that day over Kansas, a reminder that heroism does not always look like something big and loud. Sometimes, it is simply a person standing up, walking forward, and saying, "I can help," and then doing exactly that with steady hands and a calm heart.